is gonna take Cracker Jack timing, Wang.
Total concentration. You ready, Jack?
I was born ready.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. Last week we had H.H. German from Sigma Comics on here, also the writer behind Where's Calico? Or
Here Comes Calico.
Here Comes Calico. I'm sorry about that. We had him on the channel. We tried to talk about criticism, but we were expanding on the conversation, but we were limited in time. And so we're going to expand on that a little bit more here today, kind of talk about the modern product that we have out there, some of the issues that people have, and then maybe just expand upon this a little bit more. I want to say thank you very much to H.H. German again. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Thanks for having me again, Wes. Appreciate it being on the show.
Well, I really appreciate this. So I think one of the things is if you want to fix anything, you have to actually define exactly what it is that needs fixing. Like, what is it that's an issue? I think a lot of people do tend to focus on the culture war aspects of it, which I do think are part of the issue. But in your mind, what is wrong with modern comics right now? What is it you are out to achieve with your series Calico, where you're trying to, maybe be part of the solution?
Right. Well, a couple of things, and I'll start with the first one because the first one has a lot of things. What's the problem with comics? You and Perch do a good job of establishing the issues in comics, and that's why yours are the only channels that we subscribe to. But to break down the product, I talked about this in the last exchange that we had, the last segment, and it was that you have the product that's pretty deficient. There's lots of reasons for that. Creatively, there's an issue with the content that's coming out. The quality of the product that you and I enjoyed back in the 80s, 90s is significantly different than it is today. Okay, and one of the things I discussed in our last video, I talked about, I posed the question, what's the fundamental thing that happens between superheroes and villains? And you answered correctly, which is conflict. I called it fighting, which is the same thing. It's conflict, right? So in my view, you have a product that's being put out there to the masses that is deficient in the fundamentals of understanding that basis, the conflict, the fight. So if you have this product whose essence is the conflict between the good and the evil, that if this is not being understood definitively, well, you've got a product that keeps coming out every month that fails to achieve this. I mentioned boxing last time. I think boxing is a wonderful analogy for lots of different things, but in this case, it's enormously essential. I mean, think about anything that deals with conflict. Okay, I could tell you quite a few right off the bat that I think would be helpful to these creators if they fundamentally understood these things. Boxing, okay, mixed martial arts. Don't laugh. Soap operas. Okay, there's lots of drama and tension and conflict in these things, and if you go the Latin soap opera route, even more so. Mm-hmm. So these are mediums that have enormous conflict, but not only that, there are bodies of work that you can study. They have enormous history, certainly in the case of boxing. In this country, MMA, you and I had a nice, colorful discussion about MMA. And, I'm someone who participated in mixed martial arts events, back in the 90s. When in this country, it hit at sort of the early stage. This was a time when people were going in the ring against, you didn't even know, frankly, what you were going in the octagon against. There were weight classes that didn't matter. It didn't matter how tall, short, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to experience that. But the fundamental is the conflict. Okay, so you have an example like, for instance, if these writers understood more about fighting. Here's an example, okay? Well, how do you fight up against a fighter who fights in the Philly shell? The Philly shell is where you keep your hand, the right hand high and the other hand down here low, and you block everything with one hand and all the body shots with another. That's an extremely difficult style to fight against. Well, in comic books, you have certain heroes that are built a certain way or have certain techniques or superpowers that make it difficult for them to fight other villains. So there's a constant stream of malleability in the storyline that hero has to adjust to, because a Doc Ock is going to come at you in a very different way than a Rhino is going to come at.
Mm-hmm.
And just like in boxing, you had these opponents that would come at you in a very different way. You know, Ali fought, one of the great things, you know, everybody knows Muhammad Ali, but few people that, again, aren't in boxing know that Muhammad Ali beat you 9 out of 10 times from a massive distance. He could beat you from a huge distance, and he incorporated his footwork to do these things. Well, every writer in comic books should definitely know about boxing. They should know about mixed martial arts. They should know about, soap opera, that tension. Those are fundamental things, and know the history of these things, because if you're aware of these conflicts, these difficulties, that makes the story all the more compelling. So when you see today's writers introducing a character like the Rhino versus Spider-Man, or someone like a Doc Ock, they have all these intricacies and textures that they could add to the conflict that boils up the tension and makes it much more suspenseful, and you're much more educated and cued in, and it makes the reader more engaged because, whoa, they're getting all these little tidbits about the interaction between the Rhino, or maybe he lost one of his tentacles, and well, that's okay because he has this coming at him now. And all of these things add to wonderfully delicious stories that keep the reader compelled, and that unfortunately is missing today. So I think, thank you for allowing me to expand upon that, because it is essential. Fighting and conflict is the essential thing in comic books. It's good versus evil, and you need to understand that. And that's
in order to do that, you really got to understand the character. You have to understand the core components of what is inside of your character. What does your character stand for? What are your character's weaknesses? What heroic traits can you use against him?
Right.
And the conflict that you put the character into should, it could be a different things, but one of them, it could put them at a physical disadvantage, i.e. the foe has a natural advantage over the hero, something they have to overcome, or what the foe represents is completely opposed to what the hero represents.
Right.
I'm fighting for freedom, and the foe is not fighting for freedom. He actually wants to shut down freedom or thing. That's natural conflict within the characters, and you get really good resolution. What you could also get are certain character traits to where maybe it's not exactly what the character represents, but the character's life experience. You'll have the juxtaposed villain, where you had Spider-Man, and he had the death of his uncle. Obviously, he got bit by a radioactive spider, but he remembered, with great power comes great responsibility, and he's taken the burden upon himself. And you have the opponent over there that, with great power, doesn't take responsibility. With great power means I need to grab more power, or I don't take responsibility whatsoever. So you have ideas as far as what the character means within the universes, and they go against each other. So if you introduced a Joker into the Marvel universe as a foe for Spider-Man, you could definitely make it work. That character is naturally opposed to Batman because he's more colorful. He's more more of an anarchy kind of character, whereas Batman obviously is more kind of law and order, kind of a doom and gloom kind of character. Wouldn't exactly work perfectly against a Spider-Man, even though I think people would love to see it.
Right.
Because the foe in that case was created specifically to counteract Batman and have him something to give him something to overcome. Absolutely.
And, in that capacity, what you just described in the first part of your example there was Mike Tyson versus Buster Douglas. I mean, here's someone who loses his mother, literally like a few days before this fight. And they tell him, listen, you could postpone this or push this back a little. And, Tyson at that time was, I don't need to tell you. I mean, in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, I mean, Mike Tyson was it. He was unbeatable. Let's just say it. Okay.
But if you go back and watch him at that point in time, not only is he the most feared puncher in the history of boxing at the time, but if you actually watch him, and you have to actually go back and study him a little bit as a fighter, he's essentially unhittable.
Right.
His defense is so tight that he's almost never been punched up to this point in his career. So his hubris is actually off the charts. So we know that when he went to Japan, he was not taking care of himself. He was out every single night having a very fun time. enjoying the spoils of life, while Buster Douglas was going through an internal conflict, had some loss, and had promised his mother he was going to win the title for her, and then lost her days before the fight.
It's incredibly emotional, and that's why millions of people all around the world tuned in, didn't matter where they were, to something like this. And really, that's what we need back in comics. And it was that storyline.
And also Tyson was just must-see TV because he was just this killer.
Absolutely.
He's a force of nature at that point.
Absolutely. It's incredible. What that night was incredible, and it's talked about to this day on a regular basis on shows and brought
like
up
90-1 underdog or something insane. Essentially, the odds were that he can win.
Right. That's it. You can't win. It was literally Adrian saying, listen, you can't win, and even the trainers were concerned, because
he's $100, you'd make like 90,000 or something insane.
It was incredible. And that's the kind of thing we need in comic books, because all of these heroes, I'm going to say something. I just came from, yesterday I was at the New Jersey, the Super New Jersey Expo, Comic Expo. Shout out to Paul, by the way. He did a great job running that show. I spoke with Jim Shooter, and he was there. And, it was a brief chat. I didn't want to take up his time because he had a long line of people waiting to, sign stuff. And, here's someone who understood fighting. You say, well, HH, what do you mean boxing and fighting? How does this relate? And I said, you know what? These legends, these people who had a set format for understanding how to pit these characters against each other, I guarantee you that someone like Jim Shooter is going to go ahead and be a boxing fan. Just the way he approached his process and how he approached storytelling and the setting up the scenario for the good versus evil. I sent you, I believe, some images that you could share with the audience here.
There's two of them, correct?
Yeah. The first one is just the first thing that came up was the picture of the comic book that he, this is the second thing, but you could read there. That's it. So that's the first thing that came up, and I scrolled down. Here it was a comic book that was edited, of course, by Jim Shooter, one of hundreds, maybe even thousands of comic books. But if you look at the next image, I scroll down to see the comments on here, and it's the thing with boxing gloves. But you can see the last comment there, the fellow with the green icon. I think you could read it just better than I can there.
It says, in his intro to the Marvel 2-in-1 Masterworks, Ron Wilson talks about him and Jim Shooter were both big boxing fans, and that's why they came up with this issue and how he got to design the champion. This issue also really cemented the idea that Ben's real power came from never giving up.
Right. And that's a beautiful thing to hear, not only obviously about the thing, but also, I didn't know anything about the likes or dislikes of Jim Shooter, but literally this morning, knowing that I wanted to talk to you about this stuff, I said, you know what? I bet Jim Shooter's a boxing fan, someone who understood boxing. Guy's a huge boxing fan. Okay, and here I am meeting him to confirm it. He's a boxing fan.
Not surprising. He kind of grew up in the Depression era. We know that he went to work in the industry at 14 years old. At that time, the biggest sports celebrities in all of the world were essentially prize fighters.
Right.
And of course, you have the amazing story. If you haven't seen the Cinderella Man, you're missing out on one of the greatest movies of all time. True story.
Jim Braddock.
Yeah, Jim Braddock.
Yeah. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about that, because it's one thing to put that out there and just leave it there. It's another thing to really address this and boil down how important understanding conflict is. This message, it's to the creatives. For you guys out there, this isn't about, the previous video was about criticism. Well, this is positive, constructive advice to you as a comic book creator. Okay, mainly this criticism goes to the big two, because that's where you are, and comics is fortunately or fortunately, you guys are driving this industry, and this is a good lesson that you guys can learn, understanding that piece.
There's another lesson out there, HH. We had talked about this ahead of time, but I'm an enormous pro wrestling fan. And there, you get the male soap opera, as you were talking about, but it's also played out in the ring. That's why I think a lot of wrestling fans end up naturally progressing over to MMA. Because instead of choreographed fighting, you actually got to kind of see that thing in real life It turns out it looks a lot different than we anticipated it does. But
Right.
there's a natural progression, obviously, for someone like me to go from wrestling fan over to MMA or even boxing fan to MMA. But if you look at wrestling, obviously, in order to sell the shows, it's not just based upon who's on the marquee. What they would do, it's essentially a traveling kind of circus-like atmosphere. And I'll bring up one of my favorite performers ever, Dusty Rhodes, also one of the most significant and really influential bookers of all time. And he knew, as a booker, that the money was in the babyface or the good guy chasing the bad guy.
Right.
So you had himself, the small town son of a plumber who had to work for everything that he's ever wanted to, but always still went around with his cowboy boots and blue jeans on, was still very confident in himself, but knew where he came from, remember his roots. And you see the ultimate foe that he has throughout his career, Ric Flair, the leader of the Four Horsemen, styling, profiling, come take a ride on Space Mountain. I take a private jet everywhere I go. I drink the finest wine. I only date the finest women. I've got the gold made. I have a gold belt on me wherever I go. So you have two completely at odds characters, complete motivations, completely at odds that put them directly in conflict because people are going to have to choose. Do I want this guy that represents the common man, the son of a plumber that had to work for every damn thing he ever had, or do I want to root for the guy that's always bragging about how rich he is and how successful he is and how he only dates models and all this thing? And they would just travel this thing all around the South,
Right.
And they would have these big main events, and every once in a while, in wrestling, they don't always, the hero doesn't always win, unfortunately, especially in the NWA, WCW. That territory was always more of a bad guy territory where it was the chase. You could put on the marquee that Dusty Rhodes is going to challenge for the title on on Thanksgiving Day. What is it? Is that when they did Starrcade? I think that's where they started with Starrcade. But there's so much stuff that transfers from pro wrestling directly into comic books because you got to have characters that are in conflict. You have to build up the conflict to where it feels meaningful, to where I say, I don't care what's going on next Saturday. I'm going to be in the front row, or I'm going to be in front of my TV to watch this happen because it's meaningful to me.
Yes.
On who wins.
Yes. And not only influential to comic books, the most popular boxer, probably the most popular athlete in the history of humanity, Muhammad Ali, patented himself on Gorgeous George was a wrestler back in the 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. He admitted this. He said, listen, one of the things that made me maligned and loved by, two different groups was creating this tension that I learned from this wrestler, this professional wrestler, calling himself Gorgeous George. I think that was his name. Guys, people in the audience, you can correct me here. But wrestling, wonderful example, professional wrestling, wonderful example of how you can create that conflict, that storyline.
I thought it was Freddie Blassie for some reason. Freddie Blassie?
It could be. It could be.
It might be. It could be probably both.
Right. It could be. So, my grandfather, God rest his soul, he loved professional wrestling, and I loved wrestling myself as well as a kid. And he at noon was when the wrestling came on in the Dominican Republic. And by the way, Ric Flair wrestled in the Dominican Republic. He wrestled a champion.
He would have went there and did the Broadway, the 1 hour with the Dominican champion on there. Yeah, he probably even lost a couple of times.
Right. Well, he was supposed to win, but that didn't sit right with the audience there. But that's a whole other story.
He knew that because he was so hated with his personality that people were paying there to see him get his ass whooped.
My grandfather is a very stern man, a man of serious, deep religion. And he kept a machete in his room. And anybody who came and disturbed him when wrestling was on, and worse, when they said that wrestling was fake, he wouldn't say a word. He'd go right into his room and bring the machete. My grandfather was a very big, strong man. And he would come back with that machete, and there wouldn't be anyone, waiting for him when he came back in the room. So, yeah, absolutely. It's a wonderful way. You have to understand tension and conflict and fighting. So Thank you for giving me this opportunity to.
And Floyd Mayweather is another good one. Obviously, he's probably the most well-known fighter, at least of the last 5-10 years.
Right.
And he's not well known because he's had like all these great fights. In fact, I would say most of the big fights he's had are kind of duds, especially the ones that he's outright won. They're kind of boring. The ones that have been close, I personally thought he lost. I don't think that he beat Oscar De La Hoya. I'll say that to this day, and I don't think he beat Tito Trinidad. I think that he was so far on the scorecards by the time he got to the 6th round, he was going to have to win the whole thing. But that's another thing. But he made himself so hateable by using a lot of the Ric Flair technique. Look at my money, you know, he's counting his money on his thing and talking about how above he is everyone else, that people would literally throw their money down, knowing that he's not a knockout artist. It's going to be entertaining, but really, I'm just willing to invest $50, $60, $70 at a time in the hope that this guy that I know isn't going to do it can actually beat him this time.
Well, it's a great example. So you bring up a person who understood how to use flair, creative showbiz flair, to create that storyline. Another student of professional wrestling, Floyd Mayweather, but a fighter who fought in the Philly Shell, probably the most well-known one. And let me tell you, you brought up some fighters there. And again, understanding fighters. This is why it's so important to understand this. Juan Luis Castillo, a Latin fighter. I don't know what country. I think he's a Mexican fighter, Juan Luis Castillo. In my opinion, beat him. How did he beat him? He beat him by the technique that Roberto Duran, right now, if you go on YouTube, there's a video right now, Roberto Duran showing people how to beat the Philly Shell style, okay? Because guess what? Robert Duran was fighting his father, Floyd Sr., okay? And he also...
obviously, my goodness, how am I forgetting the greatest, the Sweetness, what's his name?
Sweet Pea.
Oh, obviously he fought him, but who's the one that he said he got him no mas? It was Sugar Ray Leonard.
Sugar Ray Leonard.
Yes.
Yeah, he was more lightning quick, hand speed and foot speed. But the Philly Shell was something tricky. I mean, this is why this family, you know, Floyd Mayweather was winning these fights because they couldn't do it. But Duran knew that if he beat up his shoulders, okay, right below the shoulder, right where the arm starts and it goes into the shoulder, he pinpoints him there, and you keep focus on there. Those arms are going to drop. And once they start dropping, he's toast, okay? Point is, if you're a comic book writer, okay, and you understand how to incorporate that tension, that conflict, that high risk of danger, and that knowledge that the hero has to beat the opponent, all these things are juicy morsels to give the readers, to build up that tension, that suspense. That gives you a wonderful story that's going to keep these people coming back and back and back for more. That's how you fix a product, by getting to the essence of the issue and improving the quality of that stuff. So anyway,
also, because there's serialized reporting, one of the things that you'll see, especially in the great boxing, we'll stay on this analogy, when you see two boxers continuously meet, is you see the evolution because they're learning things as they're fighting.
Right.
And obviously, Sugar Ray Leonard is one of the best examples with Roberto Duran. Roberto Duran got him for the first time.
Right.
And it wasn't altogether, it did not look good. But when they fought the next time, with a little bit of hook and crook as far as how they booked the fight and the round, whatever. But he also completely changed up his style and changed how he was fighting to attack his opponent. So that's like one of the cool things that you can do when you have these conflicts that are lasting for decades, is you plant the seeds and the villain is able to take advantage of the hero here by doing this. And then maybe the next time they meet, a year and a half, you go to do that again. And the hero's learned. Right. And he kind of uses it against. And then that's paying off the fans as well and really rewarding from them for investing months and years in these characters, which is definitely something a lot of times you get within boxing and certainly wrestling.
Right. Wonderful example. And clearly a student of boxing, you are very well versed in understanding boxing history there. Great example. The other thing that comes from that, there's a story, there's a video game series called Mega Man. Okay, one of the most compelling things about that series is the Mega Man, once he beats his opponent, okay, once he's able to beat that opponent, he takes that essence, that essential fundamental thing that makes that character unique, that made it so difficult to beat that character. Well, now he knows how to, how to beat him, and now he uses it for his own advantage. wow, what a wonderful and creative example of how to keep that story. And I think they're on, I don't know how many versions of Mega Man. And all
It's a
these
lot.
and
But
video
it's another cool thing as a little kid. You have to recognize what the strengths of your first enemy or your previous enemy were, because
That's
eventually you go up to another boss and you have to figure out which suit you want to wear that time. And if you're fighting the guy whose suit is wood, fire might be the way to go. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is why, this speaks to now, the culture war. So, there's, I think I communicated this last time. I think we're wasting a lot of time and energy. There's this fight that we learned about coming into comics. This whole left versus right, social versus, social justice versus veteran in Comicsgate, new versus old, et cetera, et cetera. We're wasting time on this kind of thing. We need to focus on improving the quality of this product, because that's the essence of everything. Everything comes from that. When you have quality creatives that aren't allowed to work, this is something that blows my mind to this day. Okay, a year into this industry, Mike Baron, Chuck Dixon, not allowed to work at the big two. This is outrageous. There's a guy by the name of Ethan Van Sciver. He's in the Comicsgate group there, and I tune into that show every now and then. You got these people who they're not allowed to work in the big two because of what they believe in, what flag they fly at home when they get home from the comic book, from the publisher, from Marvel or DC. I think this is a sorry state, because we're focusing on the crumbs here, on the stuff that has nothing to do with comic books. Comic books is about stories, creating wonderful, rich stories that pit good versus evil. If you are a person who subscribes to a certain political background, that's great. Keep that at home. In the comic books, you do what you do. But to have someone like Mike Baron not working that's crazy. The only way I can pick up a Mike Baron comic book is by going to Indiegogo now and doing the Comicsgate purchase. And I will gladly do it, and I'll keep doing it if that's where I'm going to get Mike Baron and Chuck Dixon and Ethan Van Sciver and all these other people who are extremely talented. It has nothing to do with my politics. I wear this hat for two reasons. One, to help people understand, that you can't get more social justice than Sigma Comics. It's literally in our tagline. Justice for all. Okay. The other reason I wear it is to honor Robert Bell, and he's the creator of this logo, obviously inspired by Marvel's Thor, but he was one of the people that started pretty much the mail order business in comic books. I'm going to be talking with him soon, because I'll be going to Florida, and I'll be spending quite a bit of time with him down there. He's one of the people that helped us get this off the ground, and if I were to tell him what's going on these days and what you can and can't buy, what you can't and can't say, or risk of being fired, I don't even know what he'd say, frankly, but he'd be very upset. And I'm going to tippy toe around the issue, because he's up in age and whatnot. But it's a sorry state, and we're wasting time. The sink is the ship is not in a good condition right now. So all of us that join this industry, we've got buckets. Okay, those of us who want to do some good stuff here. Okay, and you can't put these buckets into this water fast enough with the damage that the big two have done to this industry. So that's one of the things that I want to talk to you
really
about. This
speaks to like a level of professionalism and kind of just some of the things that are holding back the comic book industry. I personally am from a very small town, like 1,200
Right.
people. You probably had 1,200 people in your high school class, let alone your entire high school
right.
Building. You probably had
New York.
5,000 people. Yeah, in the Bronx.
Right.
So it's a very small community. I'm kind of from there, and you get things that are very cliquish. It's very much of it's a closed off community. You're allowed to stay if the powers that be decide you could stay. It's not like a meritocracy. It's who you know. Are you in good standing within the community itself? And if you're not, you'll be excised out. Which is obviously has happened to Mike Baron, to Chuck Dixon, Ethan Van Sciver. We recently saw it with Aaron Lopresti, longtime artist. Started out with a little bit at Marvel, worked at Malibu, had long time been associated with DC Comics.
Right.
It's crazy, and these creators get maligned, and then you have people on the inside pointing at them saying, how could you do this? You know, and accusing them of all this stuff. Is like, well, you're the kind of the ones that took their ability to make money. Took away their ability to make money. What'd you think they were going to do?
Right.
Not
Again,
go make comics somewhere else?
Right. Again, I say this as, you know, firmly as a social justice company. Okay. What I'm about to tell you. Okay. When you got two products on the shelf, one that's fabric is very cheap. The seams are ripped. Okay. You got tears in the product. Okay. But it's sold in this part of the, you know, this nice store. Okay. Where more people like to go, and it's whatever it is. And then you got this side here, and you got a product that's got great fabric. Okay. Wonderful stitching, wonderful quality. Okay. I don't care where I'm getting that product. I want the good quality product. That's the product I'm going to take home. And what I'm telling you, the audience, okay, and I'm telling you, Wes, is Marvel and DC are putting out a product that is not good. Okay. And how do I know it's not good? It's not an opinion. You know, you could call your product good. I don't care how much you say it. You know who tells you whether the product is good or not? The consumer. That's what capitalism is. You start putting out bad products, guess what happens? People stop buying your product. And guess what's happened to Marvel and DC comic books? Okay, the sales have gone down. You know what's happened for Ethan Van Sciver and some of these other people that are trying to put out high quality products? People are buying these things. Okay, that's what's happening. So I don't care who is putting it out, what you guys are doing. I just want to buy a good quality product. And that's the tie-in to what's going on here. You got inferior products, and you guys are spending your time bickering on the social media. Who's, you know, voting for who and who's all this when you got a bad product coming out. Get back into the kitchen, okay, and make sure that that product comes out tasty, hot off that press, and everybody wants to eat this thing. Get back in the kitchen, all right? So that's what we need in comic books these days. Somebody to go and have, you know, like you said in one of these videos, that editorial level, that management level needs to be there doing this. Okay, there has to be someone driving this thing, because right now there's no one at the wheel. Okay, so to speak. Okay, and it's very angry.
We just had Chuck Dixon on the channel, obviously for a wonderful interview. I really appreciated that. But he talked about when he was writing Batman, his group editor was Denny O'Neil.
Another legend.
One of the greatest writers of all times.
Absolutely. You're
talking about somebody that's captaining the ship that knows how to navigate waters, definitely knows how to do Batman, knows how to do all these characters, and is going to make sure that these the creative teams have every piece of equipment or information necessary to provide a wonderful product for the customers. Right. You just don't have that anymore. You don't have someone that's been a successful writer, or somebody that's really done a quintessential Batman story that's sitting there overseeing the Batman line anymore. It's just it's something that's really been lost.
And it's just, that's key. And that, thank you for bringing that up, because that brings us into the third issue is the problem. You know, I talked about the product and, you know, the culture war, which I think is, you know, the energy is misplaced there. There needs to be a focus on the product. Let's get into the problem, you know. So I see the culture war sort of as a peon versus peon kind of thing. You know, it's all, everybody's on the ground fighting. Okay, you got infantry fighting here, when the serious problem is a bit of higher on the chessboard. Okay, so I see conflict. There's some things I know about. One thing that I know about very well is fighting. Okay, I've been doing it all my life. Okay, I see things, or any conflict as a chessboard. Okay, where you're moving these pieces. DC did something at the end of the 80s. I'm sorry, at the end of the 70s. Okay, Superman the movie, and that did something incredible to comic books. Okay, I don't want to go into the details because there are videos about that. But what it did was it brought back Superman into the present pop culture at the very top, and it inspired so many different people. I don't care if you were into comic books, you weren't into comic books, if you were immigrant, if you were native, if you were left, right, the whole country was inspired by this character, and it uplifted the whole country. Not only did, you know, it lifted this country's presence in the world. Okay, this Superman character. Okay, now it raised millions of dollars. Okay, what happened to the industry, to the comic book industry? Let me clarify. Comic book sales went up, okay? A decade later, DC, okay? Again, Batman, okay, at the end of the 80s, 90s. The response, incredible, billions, okay? What happened to the comic book industry? That's the key, comic book industry. Gangbusters, even higher. Good thing for comics, okay? A decade later, Marvel starts getting into this, okay? Marvel's been holding back, okay? So now we're talking at the end of the 90s going into the 2000s. All of a sudden, Marvel comes in here and starts working with these studios now, okay, the movie studios. The result is Spider-Man and the Marvel universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, billions and billions and billions of dollars, okay? So we want to look at a culprit here. What happens after that? Shortly after this time, this is when you start seeing the corporations really start seeing, hey, you know, we could really start getting into these this comic book industry and planting our flags and really start pumping out these billions. Okay, forget about these millions. And you start seeing a cultural change at the comic book companies, okay? What I'm trying to tell you is that prior to this stuff by DC, okay, and Marvel coming in and doing the billion-dollar industry piece, the chess piece roles were different, okay? The peon, okay, was the fan, and the peons were the fans, okay, and the creatives. Then you had, rooks, bishops, and all these other things. Populate them as you will, but every single individual on that chessboard was directly tied to comic books, all the way from the editor-in-chief, which at that time would have been the king or queen position, and into assistant editor, writer, penciler, colorist, et cetera, et cetera. Go ahead and take a look at those chess pieces now. Once the corporations came in, okay, at the advent of these billion-dollar movies, all those roles for those chess pieces came down. So all of us are down here in this peon level, okay? Fans and creatives. You know, the average creator, I can't speak because I haven't worked for the big two, but these creatives were making way more money back in the 80s and 90s than they're making now, okay? And
in a lot of cases, they were making the same amount of money, obviously, which is a problem because it's been 30 years.
Inflation, right. That's what I mean, right? The inflation.
It's insane the way that the industry just like stagnated. It just stopped.
Point being, Marvel in particular, I mean, once they shifted the focus, okay, to making sure that you have a high quality product by having the focus on strong editorial teams, okay, management teams to understand how to put out that quality product. And you have executives come in and start filling these higher roles on that chess piece, okay? And everything's getting pushed down is what I'm trying to tell you, which is why you start seeing, the news and comics when you go on YouTube is some kind of culture war. Well, that's not the big problem. The big problem is a few rungs up and higher than that. That's what I'm trying to communicate to you is that once the billions came in, this thing of ours that we love called comic books has changed. And now we're at a point where if you want to buy a comic book from a legend, you got to go on Indiegogo to do that. Whereas before, you could go right down the corner, roll, with 50 cents or 60 cents and pick up a comic book, a piece of gum, a can of soda, and have a wonderful afternoon. And you just can't do that anymore. And that's really sad.
I'm going to have a video on this very subject about why what has happened with comics is essentially like killed off the medium outside of America. Well, I'm in the Philippines. I've got another contributor that lives in a Latin American country, and they've seen it even worse there, where these characters are essentially inaccessible as comic book characters, because as you mentioned, Marvel Comics are no longer the king of their own destiny. They are a passenger on the Disney bandwagon. And when you look at the Disney bandwagon, we're talking about Pixar. We're talking now Marvel Studios is something completely different than Marvel Comics. Marvel Studios, we're talking Lucasfilm. We're talking all these big, enormous franchises sitting there. We're talking theme parks. We're talking cruise lines. We're talking, lifestyle apparel lines and everything. And then you got Marvel Comics. Is essentially, it's not even a pawn at that point. It's not even a player. No one's going to make a decision at Disney based on what's in the best interest of Marvel Comics and their fans, because the profits being brought in are so insignificant. and it's one of the stark realities that we have to kind of realize that's the time we're in.
Right. So, now you're bringing up the solution. Comic books were always subculture is cool. Comic books cool. Corporations move in. You know who's not cool? Corporations.
Yes.
They're not.
It's like Michael Cole telling you to chant along with the hero in wrestling, and immediately everyone's going to stop thinking that hero is cool because Michael Cole is the least coolest thing in wrestling history.
Right. And now we get to the solution, which is the fourth part I want to talk to you about. Mm-hmm. So, in comic books, I just talked about the billions that these people are making now at Marvel and DC. Okay. If they're making billions, why are comic book creators, okay, the essence of the product, why are they making pennies, okay, compared to the billions they're making? I'm gonna give you an example. I love using examples. Bodybuilding, okay? Bodybuilding has this show called the Mr. Olympia. Okay, it's the show of the year, all right? It's sort of the Comic-Con, if you will, the San Diego Comic-Con. It's the big show. People go there, and they have a bunch of different competitions. Okay, you got the Mr. and the Mrs. Olympia. You got all the different weight classes. You got the open, the classic physique, the natural, all these other fitness. I think is another one. A bunch of them. The winner of the Open the Open Mr. Olympia makes something in the order of close to $500,000. Okay, for literally a few minutes of posing up there that night. I think it's a weekend, but it's only a couple of things. But there are multiple shows in there. Well, do you know that the winner of the Mr. Olympia Classic makes something like $10,000 or $15,000? Something like that. Yeah. This is crazy. All these people are fueling. Bodybuilding is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Okay, and you say, how is it possible that these people have been able to make all this money? I'll tell you how. Because with the many millionaires that bodybuilding has, every single one of them has an incredibly effective social media presence. Okay, I don't care what level, by the way, and what placing you get show after show. Every one of these athletes, these physique athletes, has an excellent social media presence. In other words, the industry encourages the bodybuilders to go out, educates them, gives them knowledge of how to improve their social media presence, how to better interact with their audience on an ongoing basis. Hence, they build their own storylines, the tension and build up to my Mr. O competition this year, even though I'm placing, 15th or whatever it is. These people have millions of followers. Okay, and from that also comes sponsorships. Okay, for absolutely. Right, merchandise and all these other. These people are making millions of dollars, some of which aren't even in the top 10. There's one bodybuilder who hasn't even competed in something like 5 or 6 years. He's a millionaire, 5 times over, without even competing because he's been able to harness today's technology and communication platform. How is it then that Marvel and DC are not investing in their creatives, getting those creatives out there, giving them exposure, giving the titles exposure on an ongoing basis so that comic books, an American institution, okay, doesn't benefit from this kind of balanced financial progress? It is astoundingly and egregiously sad that.
I agree with you, but I could, if you think about it. So if you've got limited shots to fire on a marketing campaign, right? Right. How many slots does Disney and Marvel Studios get to get a shot over there at Jimmy Fallon, and go out there and really communicate with everybody on a late night TV show? Do you want to take Donny Cates, but a bit more charismatic creator, a little bit younger? A lot of people can connect with him a little bit more. Who, if he has a successful Venom, book, well, I guess he's doing Hulk now. Let's say if he does a successful Hulk book, it might generate them a couple $1 million if it's really successful. Or I can get Mark Ruffalo to go on there, and he's just he's not even starring in his own movie. But if his movie is successful, we're going to make $450 million.
Right. Well,
The
Listen,
stakes are so much lower now that they're in cogs in the this big machine that is Disney, and obviously DC's a little different. They've kind of always, well, not always, but they've been a part of Warner Brothers, I think, since the 80s, maybe a little bit earlier than that.
yes, earlier. But you're hitting it on the head. They're playing small ball. Okay, who wants to go and do these big things like this when you could, little by little start, cultivating? It's all about seeds. You start putting these seeds out, just like bodybuilding's done. You give people some information, you encourage them, keep getting them out there, support them. Okay, the big two are not doing this. Okay, you're out on your own, my friend. If you're creative at Marvel and DC, okay, you what you need to do. Go ahead.
This brings up a really good point. It's almost like you follow the UFC, correct?
Yes.
Nobody in the UFC wants to be a bigger star than Dana White. He actually wants the UFC to be the biggest draw in the company over Conor McGregor, over John Jones, over George St. Pierre. And he's certainly gone out of his way and has been very effective to make the UFC the higher selling property over their superstar fighters. When you go to the boxing industry, they're looking for superstars that can go sell pay-per-views like Canelo Alvarez, Floyd Mayweather's, because there's a bunch of competition as far as who could go out there and actually go out there and promote the matches. You don't only have to go to Top Rank. You can go over and go to Golden Boy, and there's a bunch of different options out there. So they're all vying for the services. So they have to, as a promoter, you have to be able to say, I will make you the biggest boxing star in the entire world. Whereas the UFC, there's competition kind of within Bellator, and you got PFC and stuff going on, but nothing rivals the UFC, and nothing can rival the star power of the UFC. You go over to comic books, you've got Marvel and you've got DC. And we know that in the 90s, we had 7 superstar artists led by Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, and Rob Liefeld that were able to blow up their own brand and profile to the point where they were able to leave, create their own company. And Marvel and DC are terrified of ever letting another artist specifically, but it kind of works with writers as well, ever let them become their own brand to where they don't need Marvel, they don't need DC, they could move out on their own. And you're definitely seeing people being held back, not being allowed to ascend to that point where they can transcend comics and go out there and sell 1.5, 2 million comics on their name alone, as Jim Lee, as Todd McFarlane have. Literally the last 2 creators that were allowed to do something like that in comic books. Well,
you answer my point, right? So you got billions that they're making, and all of a sudden, why are they making pennies? Well, what you just said is wonderful and precise. Well, what would have prevented that? Guess what would have happened if Todd McFarlane would have been paid an extra couple $100,000, which he most certainly would have deserved by selling all those millions of Spider-Man comics. Okay, if you would have paid them, Jim Lee paid them, you would have paid Tom McFarlane, paid all these people. Do you think it would have been an easy thing to get Jim Lee and some of these other people to go and do this thing called Image Comics? They didn't pay them. Okay, so they created their own monster by not paying these wonderfully talented creatives and not treating them with respect. Well, guess what? You got your comeuppance with Image Comics. So that's a wonderful example, and that was the outcome of that decision by Marvel there and DC. So the other thing is, I'm going to keep going down on the line some of these things that I see here. Like, why aren't comics in more places? Okay, when you and I were kids, we'd go down the street. Right. Well, too expensive. Exactly. Okay, you got a comic. The average comic now is something like $4 or $5 in some cases. Okay, you can go on down to the candy store, which is where I got my comics as a kid, right on the corner, the candy store, and I can get tons of comics. Okay, Silver Surfer, the Hulk, Batman, everything was there. Okay, as I got older, I started getting them at the magazine store, at the gas station because I was driving, at the pharmacy. These are all places that had comic books, and who is fundamentally responsible for creating and establishing a network and a system and a platform for the delivery of these comic books. Okay, yeah, they're distributors here, but when you are a company of the size of Marvel and DC, you can establish terms and create a scenario whereby your product is being delivered to the masses in a very effective and progressive way, so that you make a very good, healthy amount of money for that business, the comic book industry part of that business. That's not happening now. Why haven't these executives sat down and say, listen, we're doing a pretty good job in this film media piece. How about we take some of this money back and start working on this infrastructure? You know, that's a big word we're hearing these days in politics, infrastructure, because the country is now trying to improve its roads and bridges and all these things. Well, guess what? An effective corporation that wants to deploy its product in an effective way needs infrastructure. Marvel and DC don't have that. Okay,
well,
so
they bet on this the 90s blowing up and comics becoming this ultra collectible. They were going to create their own scarcity and rarity to where people were going to continuously go in there and not buy the comics as entertainment, as pamphlets with entertainment, but to buy them essentially as investments. It did not work out. They overpriced themselves. They over leveraged their position within the market, because you're right. When you and I were kids, if you went to the store, you had a little aisle. It had bubble gum, it had some candy bars, it had some baseball cards, and it had some comic books. Right. Two of those products aren't there anymore because they ended up deciding that they were going to be these ultra, they were going to be essentially investments, and they priced themselves out of the impulse buy market.
Right.
And that's baseball card packs are like $6 each now too.
That's insane. I didn't even know that. You're educating me on that. That's beyond insane. That's clinical. I mean, I don't understand how that's even possible. Do they still come with gum in there too, or no? They probably don't even get gum.
They don't come with little splinters of Babe Ruth's baseball bat that the company went and paid $1.5 million with, and then chopped it into little pieces and then put it into a card so they could have a really cool rare card. They do it with like their old worn uniforms of like a Willie Mays worn uniform, like one of 10 in existence. They'll chop it up and you'll get a baseball card, with a string in it. They're destroying history to sell as memorabilia. You don't even want to know, man. I'm upset.
I have no comment on that because it wouldn't be good. What does a 6-year-old kid know about Babe Ruth?
It's not for kids. Yep.
I tell you what a 6-year-old kid knows about good, sweet bubblegum. Okay. And, these are decisions that, I'm not even going to go there because that's a whole other problem. I'm focused on comic books here, but that's a terrible thing. This is why we price our comic books at Sigma Comics, $2.99. One of the things I think was very effective, Todd McFarlane, my favorite artist of all time. I'm pretty sure he keeps his comic books at $2.99 like we do.
He does his regular Spawn series. I'm not sure what's going to happen with King Spawn and Gunslinger Spawn, right, or the Scorch, if they're going to stay at that $2.99. But the flagship title is maintaining the $2.99.
Well, at our company, obviously we're a tiny, small company, but we have vowed to never increase our prices more than $2.99 for that reason, because we acknowledge this is a very serious, fundamental problem to comic books. We're talking about a few of them, and I've got some more to talk to you about, but that's an essential one. You cannot put out a product and expect people to pay, $5, $6, whatever the comics are now, because they've
priced themselves out of the reach of children. They've priced themselves out of the next generation of creators. If I have a comic book, and I have 3 kids right now, right, you know who can't touch them? My kids. Are you crazy? Right. Crazy? It's a $7 comic. Because I can't have you shredding $7 in front of my face. It's not 50 cents anymore. That's not $1.
This is why I want to continue to impress upon your audience. The management that's happening right now at Marvel and DC is egregiously bad. There's bad and there's egregious bad. This is malpractice. If you're at a corporation and you have executives doing this kind of thing, they're gone immediately. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the audience, how to engage it and how to cultivate it. When you have these kind of losses, volume to your core segment, I understand the business is tiered and there's much more to it, but when your essential business line, your comic books, are in the sorry state that they're in right now, it's immediate termination. There are no discussions. You're gone. So
that's why we're in a perpetual state of short-term business decisions. You haven't seen DC or Marvel really make a long-term business decision regarding their lines in 5, 6, maybe 10 years now. Everything is the shortest term possible decision. What is going to get us to next week? What's going to get us to the next month? What's going to get us the next quarter? Rather than what's going to lead the company forward for the next 10 years.
This is what corporations do. Okay, these days, the malignant ones. What they do is they take these billions of dollars that they get, and they put it right back into stock buybacks. Okay, and they cut R&D. They put no money in R&D. Okay, which is what they should be doing, so that they continue to innovate. But guess who gets rich? The executives. That's who gets rich. All the suits you see walking around in Marvel and DC, I'm sure they got plenty of money. Go ask. Donny Cates? I mean, I'm sure he's one of the big.
I bet he makes pretty good money. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. But how about his peers who are, don't have the name that he does? I'm pretty sure they're not doing that well in their company. It's not just the comics that are expensive; it's the shipping. Here you are as a new comic book publisher. And you're thinking, you know what? You're going to put out a product that's $2.99 because you're sick and tired of seeing comic book fans fleeced like this. Okay, and you want to put out a quality product, but at a fair price, and then you want to ship it to those people. Well, guess what? You're going to get hit in some cases with shipping costs that are higher than the actual comic book. Well, how is that even possible? Always,
yes.
How is that even possible? I'll tell you how. Mismanagement. It's the same answer. Okay, in this case, it's your post office.
Yes.
Okay, up until a couple of months ago, mail. Yeah, I'm gonna give you an example. This comic book right here, $2.99. Okay, now the collectors, we have fans that are just readers. They just want to read the stories. Okay, and we have people who want to collect the comic books, and we make sure that we mail them in a nice solid box, whatnot. We send that mailer. It's something in the order of $3 and change. Well, that's more than mailer. It's more than the comic book is. Now, how does that make sense? Well, for our readers at least, okay, up until a few months ago, you could potentially, well, you still were mailing them for about $1.20, and then of course the post office increases. Now it's like $1.60 to mail the comic book. The readers that don't need to be, basically you send it in an envelope, all right? But check this out, Wes. This is something I've never heard anybody talk about. This is a USPS largest size. It's called an oversized letter. Okay, it's the largest size they allow, where you could use first class letter mail. Okay, not package mail, letter. Okay, so you are talking about up until a few months ago, this was about 55 cents to mail. Look at how much bigger a comic book is. Okay, here's a comic book, right? This is a standard size comic book. Okay. Now look at this. Look at the width on that. See that little slip? Now, if you're Marvel and DC, it fits the whole thing. Fits the whole comic book except for that little bit. If you're Marvel in DC and you have a lobby that goes into Congress, okay? Let me give you. This is about 6 1/8. Okay, the comic book's about 6.625. Okay, width. Meaning you're talking about a fraction, literally a fraction bigger. You can mail this comic book easily, very easily, for about 50 or 60 cents. Okay, why is not Marvel and DC, okay, assembling a lobby, going to Congress and saying, listen, comic books is part of Americana. It's an American institution. Okay, going to their local congressman, putting down a bill that firmly communicates to the government, listen, we want an exception for comic books, okay, because this is part of our story, our American story, okay, and we should have this pricing so that we could send out this comic book. Well, if they just on increasing this postage alone, a half inch, literally a half inch or 3/4 of an inch, our shipping price as a small publisher goes down from $1.60 to 60 cents per piece. Do you want to know what that is? That's tens of thousands of dollars that we're saving every single month in shipping comic books. Is that going to make a big difference to Marvel and DC? Maybe not, but it probably will. But you know what? To us, it's going to make a massive, huge improvement. But you say, why would Marvel and DC want to help us? Well, we're all part of this industry, okay? And all of us, the more comic books we sell, the more interest we're able to deliver on social media and wherever else we're able to increase the industry, well, they're going to benefit too, because people want to read these comic books. Not that they don't want to read them. It's that, as you point out, they're too damn expensive. And it's not just the product, it's the shipping too, and a lot of other things. That's an example you probably haven't seen anywhere talked about.
Have you looked into Media Mail?
Yeah, we do now. We do the
as long as there's no advertisements.
Right. So we have that in our collector's editions, right? And we don't have any paid advertising. We give space to animal rights charities. Okay, so we don't have any paid advertising in our comic books, and as a result, we're able to do media mail. But
definitely substantially save a lot of money that way.
Right, but no, it's not a lot of money, because even sending it that way, you're still at $3, and change for in our case, a $2, comic book. The point is that Marvel and DC could make these things happen for all of us, so that we could all, as comic book creators, continue to improve the industry. And they still would make money. Let me tell you, they make a lot of money if they had better distribution and more people, bought their comic books and they put a good product out. They would certainly make good money on it.
Oh yeah, as you grab a Marvel comic nowadays, and the ink might come out in your fingerprints or in your fingers.
Wes, you have comic books that have typos in them now. Okay, you have grammatical errors. This is the norm, and it's horrifying. As somebody who, well, not only as a writer to see that, but as somebody who really loves these products, grew up with the products, and puts his heart and passion into these products, to see what's going on, what these people are calling products, it's really tragic. I'm going to bring up something else here. Why aren't the big two doing ongoing forums like they used to do back in the day? Back in the day, Marvel had something called the bullpen bulletins, okay? And you had them in these comic books, and it was a way to interact directly with the audience. You were able to send them out wonderful information on an ongoing basis, build up that appetite, okay, whet that appetite on an ongoing basis. And again, back and forth, interactive medium. They had something called the no contest.
No prize.
The no prize, yeah. The no prize.
When you discovered mistakes within the comic book, you let the editorial staff, and they would congratulate you with the no prize and get some notoriety.
Those typos I just talked about, those grammatical, you could turn those into positives, okay, with the no prize. It was a way to keep that audience, that readership engaged to the readership, the comic.
And it tells the readership, we appreciate that you're able to find the mistakes. And not only do we appreciate that, we will highlight it and say, yes, that was our mistake. Congratulations.
Absolutely. An ongoing interaction that is, you're cultivating that connection with that audience. It was brilliant. And this is the 1960s and 70s and 80s. I mean, I keep using this word tragic, but all you have to do is convene intelligent, ambitious, hardworking, passionate people into a room and look at what's happening and address all of these different things. We've addressed like 4 or 5 of them thus far. And if you really focus in on these things, okay, another one is why aren't there candy or toy ads in some of these comic books? These are billion-dollar entities, and you're saying you can't get Mattel or what do you call this?
I just remember that Snickers ad that had like the same interior artist that they would have in the DC comic. So you'd be reading, and all of a sudden, you realize you're reading a Snickers ad. Right. It's so much like the interior art of the comic book. That's the last one I remember.
My favorite was this is going way back though, when Hostess came out with the fruit cakes, the fruit pies, and you had the Hulk sitting there with like a bunch of fruit pies. All right, and you had a bunch of kids around the Hulk trying to get the fruit pies. Oh man, you're interacting with the characters and the products. It was a wonderful.
That is great because you could see all those mail-in services in the back with all the weird products, and you're like, right. Man, I wish this was still available. I want one of these goods. Looks really cool.
X-ray vision, rubber ducks that did all sorts of weird things, but
clubs and all kinds of stuff.
You're talking about $1 billion industry. You could easily convene an account management and advertising department, okay, that does very comprehensive account management around these brands. Now, obviously, in the beginning, if you do this smartly, you're not going to focus on your readership numbers, but you could focus on the corollary marketing tie-ins that you have as an advertiser in Marvel Comics. Obviously, $1 billion brand. with merchandise and, you know, movies and all these other things. Get in front of the people who are making these decisions. Remember, a lot of these people are parents who read these comic books. So they're making decisions for their kids as well. So it's not just, you know, back in the day, you know, even though you had adults reading the comics back then too, there's a lot more kids that were reading comic books, you know, back in the 80s, 90s and earlier. Well, now you got a lot more adults reading, so they can make business decisions, you know, for their household.
As far as advertising, you know what's weird? I don't know if you've noticed this. Have you ever said something around your computer and then 2 days later on Facebook, there's a huge advertisement for almost exactly what you talked about?
It's crazy.
It is crazy. And so comic books are competing with companies like Facebook or Meta, I guess what it's called now, or even YouTube, where they know who their consumers are. They've basically put you down into this very unique box that like this person likes this, and this. His favorite color is blue and all this thing, and they can directly advertise right at you. And it's way more effective than putting it into a Superman comic, where maybe 10% of the readers are actually interested in the product. You know, if they go through Facebook or Meta, and you have a well-defined advertising campaign, you could make sure that everybody that's interested in that, you know, sees it directly. It's nuts the way advertising is nowadays, and the fact that they have all of our metadata. Right.
So that's called remarketing. Okay, and that I know about because my background is in marketing and advertising, right?
You know better than I would.
Well, listen, this is why we do this type of thing and why we're, you know, a handful of guys here working hard on a project that could compete with these bigger companies. You know, it's sad to hear that, but it's true. We can actually compete with them. Obviously, we're not going to do it, you know, we're not going to stand and deliver with them toe to toe because we simply can't monetarily, but we know we could start picking off these people who are disaffected, who are tired of paying $5 for a comic book. You know, 98% of our comic book readers, okay, are people who have historically read Marvel and DC and simply are tired of paying $5-6 for a comic book. And then on top of that, to get terrible stories that they're just not pleased with, and then get insulted by these. I mean, it's it's beyond belief. You would have to. I'm telling you, I'm going to have to moderate what I tell Robert Bell. You know, when I meet with him in Florida about this, what's going on in comic books today. You know, the man's probably, you know, definitely in his 70s, but it's something that if you take, as I'll say it again, if you take intelligent, focused, hardworking, passionate people, get them in there. These are all things that we've discussed. You know, we brought up a lot of points here. If you get people in a room, okay, and make hard, stern decisions about how to improve, how to elevate this brand, how to approach this comic book business as a brand, okay, mini brands within the brand, okay, you learn how to position these products again to the audience correctly. This has to be, Wes, this has to be an all-encompassing approach. It has to be just like they did back in the 80s with all these, the cartoons. Okay, when the cartoons started hitting in the 80s, they started getting all those commercials in there with the toys and the candies and all this stuff, tying back into the comic book, tying back into the cereals and all this stuff, these things. Smart marketing people were in comic books back in the 80s. We need smart, hardworking, determined, passionate people at that management level to introduce focused marketers, focused advertisers, focused creatives, and together, because they really need to work together on this, on a holistic plan to address how to bring comic books back in a very, very strong way. Because if they do that, we're going to be in much, much better shape than we are right now. The problem is
you're absolutely correct. There isn't one thing that comic books can do to heal itself right now.
Right. Right.
You have to do one thing that leads into another thing, and it has to be a domino approach where you're really focusing on the industry as a whole and fixing it at every single level, because it's not one thing that's broken right now. It's a lot of things that are broken.
And this is what I want to impress upon the people who are, you know, the peons, as we call them, us who are reading these comic books, okay? It's not a left versus right thing. It's not a social justice versus comicsgate thing. It is the product sucks, okay? And people got to make it better. And those people are the people who are up here. And that has to happen, because if we don't have this addressed very soon, things are going to keep going in the direction they're in. And that's just a fact.
I absolutely agree with you. Thank you very much, HH. We're well over an hour now. I didn't know we were going to go quite this late, but I always appreciate you coming on here, having a great conversation. Are there any final words that you wanted to say before we wrap this up?
Right. Thank you so much for having me on, Wes. The best thing I could say is that I haven't already said now is, we're a small company. The reason why we came in, we saw the ship before we got on. Imagine seeing a ship going down and making a decision. Hey, I'm going to get on that ship. Okay, last year we saw the comic book industry. You don't think I didn't research the quality of these comic books. And I said, this ship's kind of going down here. Well, you know what? We're going to go on that thing. Okay, I went on.
Sounds like somebody's a Captain America fan.
Listen,
that ship's going off the rails. It's time for me to jump on there and take control.
Time to hit the play button. Okay, as soon as you see that thing go down, hey, that's when I'm motivated. Okay, I'm gonna make just a quick little story. I'm a contrarian. Okay, when the crisis hit in 2008, okay, all these car companies going down. Okay, I saw a company by the name of Ford. Okay, and I saw them coming down. I've known this company for a very long time. This is one of the premier companies in this country. It was under $2 a share. Okay, I realized that they had a decent management. They themselves weren't taking any money for recovery. I said, you know what, it makes good sense to go in here and invest in this. Well, go check out what the Ford price is now. My point is that sometimes it's good to be a contrarian. When things are going down, okay, that's when, if you got a good, strong stomach, that's when you got to come in, okay, and do the things you got to do. Well, I know I'm coming in the ship with passion and heart, and I really hope that your audience can go to sigmacomics.com and give us a shot, because everything that I'm telling you is what we put into our comics. So I would love to have you guys read Here Comes Calico. That's our shot to the bow of this fight.
And you were very smart going with Ford, because at that time, nobody knew it, but the Ford Fusion was absolutely one of the best cars in the market. It just wasn't sold for some reason.
Right. Well, that's the thing is, when there's a fire, everybody wants to get out, but some of us come in with water hoses. And that's what we need right now. We need to listen. We need a lot of guys and gals to come in and put on their hats, okay? Put on, turn that water on and get in there and get things done. So for us, at least, our shot is, our hose is Here Comes Calico. And we really want you guys to learn about this story because we think it's a good one. SigmaComics.com.
I do want to say thank you very much to H.H. Durbin and all the guys and gals behind SigmaComics.com. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you again sometime real soon.
Thank you. Keep reading comics.